Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kidsstoppress.com. We're really excited today because we have Dr. Vandita Dubey of the Parenting in the in the Age of Sex Exposure, chatting with us live today. Vandita, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to chat with you. And we have lots of questions for you. But before we get on to the questions, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what prompted you to write this book.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah. This book has an interesting story behind it. It actually started as a blog article way back in, I think, 2012 or 2013. One of the people who started Gurgaon Moms approached me saying, moms are asking a lot of these questions, and there are lots of questions around sex, child sexual abuse, things like that. How do we talk to kids about that? So I ended up writing a blog article for them, and then I forgot all about it. And then out of the blue, I got a phone call from Rupa about 2 years ago, well, 2.5 years ago. And the lady there asked me if I would write a book on, again, talking, basically a book on parenting and addressing some of these issues and how do we talk to children about sexual abuse, how do we talk to them about growing up, about changes in their bodies. And so we talked about a whole lot of topics. What we figured was that, sexuality becomes a very broad area to cover. I mean, how do you talk about sexuality without addressing gender? How do you talk about sexuality without addressing sexual violence? How do you talk about sexuality without addressing, transgender issues or homosexuality? And so there are lots of different topics to be covered. And we figured that, okay, we'll try and do a little bit of each of them and kind of present an overview. And also, so what if, in terms of the book, it's a lot research based. So in terms of whatever has been going on in the field, what people who are practicing, people who are researching, what they're finding out about all these different in these different areas, and about, for example, like media, and how does media overexposure affect kids, children, and adolescents. So it was about just my doing a lot of research to figure out what's out there and what are the new findings, and then try to put it together and give some helpful tips to parents about addressing these issues. Yeah.
So, Dr. Vandita, do you want to take us through a little bit about yourself in terms of your practice and, your areas of interest and the areas that you cover?
Yeah. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I have a master's in social work, and after my master's, I actually worked at the area of child sexual abuse, did some research, worked with some NGOs in India, and I realized that, I didn't feel very equipped to work with survivors or victims of child sexual abuse, and that was one of the reasons that kind of prompted me to go in for further education. I did my doctorate in clinical psychology, and that, of course, covers a vast area. But my training and my practice has been a lot with children, teenagers, parents, and families. And that's kind of my background. Right now, I do practice, and I work with mostly with couples and parents and individuals, because I've moved out of the big city. Now I'm in a small town in the hills. And so a lot of my practice is via Skype and phone. So I don't work with young kids anymore. But yeah, that's kind of what I do now.
Okay, I'm going to jump in straight to the questions that we've got from a lot of our readers. And of course, like when I was reading through the book, there were like, whole host of questions, because my girls are, my older ones are about 8. And, there are lots of conversations within the parenting community that, what's the right age of talking to them about their bodies and about puberty. So what's your take on that?
See, I think it's never a single conversation, and that's something that talking about bodies is something that, one starts the moment children start talking, per se. So, it starts with, the 2.5, 3.5-year-old, when you're talking about body parts and what do you call different parts of the body. And then as they become 3 and 4, it's about, okay, what's private, what's not, what can you kind of expose outside, what do you kind of that is only for you when you have a shower and stuff like that. So I think so. This is a conversation that's so about the body and about what's private and stuff like that starts really early. Ideally, it should, and it's a continuing conversation. And I think kids are great. Are great at giving us signals about what they need to know at any particular stage. So if you're really listening to them, we will hear a lot of things coming from them. They will have questions, and so our job is really to answer those questions as accurately and factually as possible, without getting into huge details that they're not ready to talk about. Ideally, about puberty, we should be talking about puberty before puberty happens for a child. Now, again, as there's an age range in which puberty hits kids, it's best to talk about it a little before that. So I would say
what would be in the Indian context?
In the Indian context, I think around 10, 11, one can start talking about it. Perhaps earlier, if you have a family history or the child is developing faster, because there are some kids who start menstruating at the age of 10 and sometimes even 9. So you can see, you'll be watching for changes in the child's body and how they're maturing, and you can kind of decide to. So that's, and I mean, when I talk about puberty, it's about, okay, what all do we want to talk about when we talk about puberty? So it's about, of course, the menstrual cycle is one thing, and with boys it's might be about talking about bed dreams and stuff like that, but that's one thing. But it's also about changes in their mood, changes in how they feel about others, changes in relationships, changes in how they view their own bodies. So rather than it be a one-time conversation, ideally multiple conversations, small conversations, as you notice them getting curious about something or noticing something, kind of addressing them.
You addressed a very interesting thing about how children as young as 3 and 4, and when actually they start talking is when you should be having this conversation, because a lot of parents at that time just have we use play words, right? So like this is a boo boo, or this is a wee wee or whatever, but we never use the actual terms. So how about when do you continue to use those those words playfully, or is there a time where you actually say, okay, now I mean, you need to move away from that baby talk and move to let them know what it is?
Well, see, I mean, there are kind of 2 points of view on this. One is, there are lots of people who say use the proper word right from the beginning, right? And I mean, why do we not use the right word? It's really out of our own discomfort, right? For a little child, will you use the word penis, or will you use the word vagina, or whatever it is, right? People feel a little uncomfortable with that, and it seems a little too much. To tell a 2-year-old for a year-old.
The child is ready, and they're, more importantly, I think they're ready to have that conversation and use those words.
Yeah. So as you stop using baby words with them as they grow older, right? With the 10-year-old, you won't use the same baby talk that you did when they were 3 or 4 years old for other things. Similarly, I think for body parts, it would be following the same rule in a way. If that is, if you've used those baby words for them when they were little, transitioning to a different language when you're transitioning to it for other terms.
Right. Also, there's always there's this thing that the mother talks to the girl about puberty, and the father talks to the dad about father talks to the boy about puberty, right?
Okay.
Is it always that, or times have changed and different sets of parents? I mean, is there a comfort level now between the father and the daughter, or the mother and the son, that you can have that sort of conversation, or does it need to always flow from one gender to the other?
No, I mean, I think it's perfectly fine for a father to talk to a daughter about puberty and their menstrual cycle and everything else, crushes and whatnot. And similarly, it's perfectly fine for a mom to talk with her son about all those things. And things are changing. I mean, times are changing. Although, I always think India is, there are multiple Indias within India. So, there are, of course, in the cities and in certain circles, it's perfectly fine. Whereas in other places, it will still be very following the gender norms about the moms talking to daughters and fathers talking to sons. And either ways, I mean, as long as you talk to the child, that's very important. And if you look at a very ideal picture, it would be great if dads can comfortably talk to their daughters about it, and vice versa, and moms talk to sons.
Yeah. Right. Also, what's the right way about having this sort of conversation, right? So a lot of parents have found comfort in sharing videos. A lot of parents feel like it's best to have a chat. Some parents feel like it's great to just laugh at, use humor to talk about it. What do you think, in your experience, is the best way to kind of have this conversation?
So again, I think it's never a single conversation. Again, it's multiple conversations, right? And oftentimes, conversations, I think there are different ways they can come up. They can come up very indirectly in terms of like talking about a pet having a litter, a dog having puppies, right? And talking about it from that point of view, and then bringing it to human beings. So the conversation can start from anywhere, and often it starts from the surrounding, or what the child is experiencing, or what they're witnessing, and then taking that as an example and talking about it. I think it's each parent to whatever is comfortable to them. If parents find it comfortable to sit and watch together a documentary about it, or whatever, a movie about it, or a book. A lot of parents also bring books, and they'll share a book with the child, or read it with them, or whatever, then that's also fine. I think the most important thing is at some point, at whichever point, to communicate to the child that you're comfortable talking about these topics with them, right? So that the child doesn't feel that, okay, you've handed them this information and you're out of the picture and you just don't want to talk about it. It's like, here, take this book, read it, and just, don't bring up any questions to me, right? So not doing that, but in whatever approach you use, but communicating very clearly to the child that they can come to you with questions and with clarifications, and that you're comfortable handling those.
Dr. Vandita, when you brought up about how, in your earlier conversation, you brought about the body image issue, right? Especially when going through puberty. So there was this recent survey in the UK which said that about 60% of the girls actually are very unhappy with the way they look, and it's given a choice that they would change a lot about themselves. How can we as parents reinforce positive body image, especially in our girls?
So body image issues are a big issue. And we're not only talking about girls in puberty, but as young as 4 and 5 year olds. I mean, this whole idea about being fat and thin is, unfortunately, we've started noticing, even in India, in conversations that little kids are having about bodies and their own body and stuff like that. So yeah, and also I also want to say that it's not just girls, but also boys. Sometimes boys don't talk about it as much, but they're as influenced and as under pressure as girls are, as far as putting up a certain, having an ideal in terms of a certain body structure and type and all is concerned. So I think I think so. It starts really young, and it starts really early, right? And it starts often in very innocent ways. And so we have to kind of start countering that. So for the little kids, it's about, what are the toys that we're gifting them? So even things about, Barbie dolls and whatever other dolls, or for boys, at some point, it could be the Transformers or, Batman or whatever, but they're all a certain specific body type. Right. So being very aware of what's out there, in terms of toys, in terms of cartoons, in terms of films that they watch. So being a little, I think, taking a call about whether you're going to give certain toys to your child or not. That's the first step, right? Whether you're going to have them watch certain cartoons or films or whatever or not. But you can't prevent everything. So the other side to it is having conversations about this. So having a conversation with your little girl about whether it's the Barbie doll, or it's about, if they're a teenager and there are some models or, film stars, or
celebrities play, like today, girls as young as 7 and 8, or, their role models are, the pop stars or the movie stars or whatever. They're obviously emulating, wafer thin bodies and bare midriffs,
Yeah.
etc. So obviously that body
Yeah.
consciousness is going to be there. And I also feel
Yeah.
like large part of it also comes from us as parents, because we're constantly, in a way, talking in front of our kids. And I mean, again, we were doing this article on body image, on Kidsstoppress, and that's the time when we were asking a lot of moms. They said that it's us as parents also, when we talk
Absolutely.
talk in front of our girls, saying,
Yeah. About our own.
weight, and I'm looking so fat, or I'm not feeling good about myself, etc. And that kind of has a ripple effect on the child as
It
well.
does. In fact, people have done research on this particular thing, which is about specifically about moms talking about their own body and about their own weight and not being happy with it, and how those conversations have a negative effect. So there's actually, you're right, there's actually research that's also been done saying this also has a negative impact on kids, and also specific messages that we give to kids saying, don't eat this, don't eat that, that'll make you fat, or this will make you fat.
I think dinner table conversations have kind of pivoted to having, instead of having this is yummy, or this is delicious, or this looks great, or you've made a great meal, into this is carbs, this is protein, this is sugar, right? That's how we are classifying food now. We're not classifying it as as anything else. So I think it's a lot to do with the environment that these kids are growing up in, where we're saying that everything that's fattening or kind of is calorie specific, it's all while there is also a lot of awareness that comes into play, like now kids as early as 2 and 3 know what's healthy and what's junk, but at the same time it's also about the other part of the conversation that we're having, right?
So it's a message. So when you do talk about those things, it's about health that we talk about. If you do have to talk about kinds of food and what's good or not, it has to be more from the point of view what's healthy rather than what's fattening. And and then promoting a healthy lifestyle, which includes exercise and going out and playing and things like that.
Right.
And just going back to what you said earlier, is just countering these messages, even if we can't avoid these messages, because their friends will talk about it, or they'll watch these advertisements, videos, whatever elsewhere. So what we need to do is really sit down with them and have conversations, saying, these images are unhealthy, these people really are unhealthy, this lifestyle is unhealthy, or whatever. So just educating our kids. So
also, that brings me to the question next is about a lot of kids at this age, between 9 and 13 or whatever, they also start questioning about homosexuality, right? So you've also brought up that in your book. So how do you explain that to a child, or how does a parent react if a child specifically says or asks about these kind of questions, or shares his preferences or whatever? What's the role of the parent?
Well, I think it starts with just looking within and saying, okay, what are my views on this? Do I have some views? Do I have any prejudices myself within me about somebody being homosexual? So I think it starts with first being looking within, and as long as you can come out and say, okay, I have no prejudices, then you will not communicate any prejudices, really, right? So if you have any reservations or issues about it, then you need to resolve them yourself. And then talk to kids about saying, this is perfectly normal. So if a boy and a girl can be together, can date, or can get married, similarly, a boy and a boy can, or a girl and a girl can, and just kind of give examples or say that's perfectly normal. So it's again not a one-time conversation, but a conversation to be had at different times. Although, I think it's also important at some point to also for parents to take a certain stance. Like, I know that in schools and with groups of kids, sometimes kids tease each other, or there is a putting down of being homosexual, right? And if as a parent you come across that, then I think it's important to kind of take a stance and say, no, that's not right. That's it. That's incorrect, or that's whatever.
Right. So, and how do you think when we discuss this with them or we let them know, will it impact their decision about homosexuality in any form? Our
No.
stances?
I mean, as in the sense, see, as far as homosexuality is concerned, it's not a decision that anybody takes to be homosexual or not. Although,
Right.
when you look at natural sexuality, there are times when certain individuals or kids will experiment with both. There are people who
Yeah.
are bisexual, who will always be bisexual, but even without being bisexual, there might be kids when they're exploring, that they will explore sexuality with both genders. And
Right.
that's one phase of it, is just a normal phase. um, but it's not going to influence their decision. If they are homosexual, they are going to be homosexual,
Right.
regardless of
Right.
whether you approve of it or you don't, you talk about it or you don't. So that
Right.
has no impact. I mean, the
Great.
only thing that will have an impact on is whether the child is comfortable then talking to you about it. If they are homosexual, will they come out and tell you about it or not? That's the only thing that will get impacted. Yeah.
So, I mean, what's the roadmap for a parent if a child comes to you and shares it? Do you have? I mean, while you'll be open and accepting about it, or you will be on the other extreme where you say, or you'll be in denial. Either ways, what's the right way? I mean, is it right of you to you know discuss it with him, share it with somebody, or if you are not so confident about how to go about it, what should a parent do?
Well, I see. I don't know about right or wrong, but if we look at the health of the child and what's good for the child, what is good for their emotional well-being, then what is good for their emotional well-being is unconditional support from a parent. So
Right.
if you can just bring yourself around to the point where you can provide unconditional support to your child, and especially if they tell you that they are homosexual, then that's really what's the make or break of the situation. If that means that you need to speak with somebody to to clear your own mind about it, or to get to the point where you can provide unconditional support, then you need to do that.
Right. I'm gonna come back to slightly younger audiences, right? So
Mhm.
slightly younger children. Um, so in India, we obviously know that the rate of child sexual abuse is really, really high, and I mean, we're all kind of partnering and working together with CSA and figuring out doing our bit in terms of how we can how we can support awareness of child sexual abuse. But
Sure.
tell me, how does one protect or educate their child, and what's the right age to begin? Because now you hear of cases as young as 6 months, 18 months,
Mm.
2.5 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if me as a parent, I don't know if I can even explain that to my child at 18 months and 2.5 years. I mean, that's those cases are bizarre, right? So
Yeah.
what's the right age, and what's the kind of conversation that you should be having with your child?
Well, I think as far as right age is concerned, it's as soon as a child starts talking, basically, is when or when you start using language with a child, is when you have to start explaining to the child what what good touch is, what bad touch is. So they can basically explaining to them that they can come and tell you if they don't feel good about anything, and also specifically saying, what are private body parts, and that nobody's supposed to touch them there, and just that message. And again, it has to be repeated many times over as they keep
Right.
growing, and you might add more details to it or whatever as they grow. But it has to start really, really young. Now, for the 6 months and 1 year olds, of course, there is
Those
no
are
language. I mean, you can't really explain to the child at that point in time. You just have to be vigilant yourself, and if your instinct tells you something's or somebody is not right, then go with your instinct, I would say. But otherwise, it's an ongoing conversation, starting as little as like probably 2 or 1.5, 2, whenever you start naming body parts and say, okay, this is private, this is okay to expose, this is this you shouldn't expose out in the open, kind of, at that point. Mhm.
No, absolutely. That brings me to my next question on, what can, today a lot of parents are obviously working, and you mentioned vigilant, right? So it's very important for
Mhm.
them to be vigilant. But today, a lot of the kids are spending time with caretakers or
Yeah.
with external people besides family. So what are the cues that parents should pick up that there is something amiss here and maybe my child is being sexually abused?
Well, I guess if you find any behavior on the part of the adult who is supposed to look after the child, I mean, whoever is a caregiver, if you find anything that's shifty, I mean, if you feel that there is unexplained time that they are spending with the child, or there's something that you feel that they're hiding, or anything amiss as far as their clothes are concerned. Of course, clothes and body parts, if you see any signs on body parts, or clothes are amiss, then of course that will ring alarm bells. But even outside of that, if you feel that there are times when you call and they don't pick up, or the child is in a more public area and the child is not there, or whatever, I mean, things like that, then it's worthwhile asking questions. And I think sometimes maybe it's also just sitting down with the person and saying, see, all this happens, sexual abuse happens, and I'm very vigilant about it, and I don't want anything happening to my child. So even if you put it out there saying, I'm aware this happens, I don't want it happening to my child, then in some ways it also makes the other person know that, okay, you're going to be watching for it, and that you're an aware parent, and you will be questioning them. So hopefully that will be a deterrent.
I'm feeling curiosity in my child when I am going to be talking about body parts or private parts or whatever. Am I feeling more curiosity that what is this? Maybe she knows about it, maybe she doesn't know about it, but I'm kind of, generating or arousing more curiosity in my child by having this conversation?
I don't think you can. I mean, children are curious. They're like curious 24/7, I don't know. I don't think it's possible to, really create curiosity as such in a child. They're just curious. So if they're going to be curious about body parts, they're going to be curious about it. And also the thing about children is if they're not interested in something, then however much you tell them about it, they will not be interested in it. So also it kind of works both ways. So I think it's perfectly fine to talk to children about their body and their body part. We do talk to them about nails and keeping hands clean and, their hair and comb your hair and this and that. So we do talk about body parts. It's just that sometimes we avoid talking about private body parts. So it's making them that as normal as talking about anything else.
Right. Great. Dr. Vandita, thank you so much for joining us. Any parting thoughts or anything that you'd like to share before we kind of close this session?
Well, I guess I think one thing for parents is that I think all of us parents are always trying to do our best, and I think whatever you're trying to do as a parent, it's fine. And I think sometimes it's perfectly fine to go with your instincts, especially about people and situations and stuff like that. I think more often than not, it's right. And so that's all. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And for everybody who's tuned in late or has tuned in late, this is the book that we were discussing, which is by Dr. Vandita Dubey, which is Parenting in the Age of Sexposure, and it is by Rupa Publications. If you haven't, then you might want to get a copy. And Dr. Dubey, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. My pleasure too. It was lovely.